be here, and I really want to thank you all for coming today. I'm going to take a little different approach to all of this and sort of set it in the, is this working? Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm not a rock star. It's going to take a while to get up to speed here. Anyway, I was saying I'm going to take a little different approach, and my idea was to set it in the context of our planetary emergencies and how these local actions feed back to protect the entire planet. I'll try to cut this really short and drop out parts of it, but let's jump into it. Some of us are old enough to remember when humans first got high enough up into the sky to see the planet as a whole. This iconic photograph from a half a century ago makes it obvious that we live on a finite world that must supply all our needs. The entire human system must fit inside the Earth system, all the air we breathe, all the water we drink, all the food we eat, and all the energy and raw materials from which we build our dreams are inputs to the human system, and all the waste products from all these activities are its outputs. This is the real economy, the ecological economy, the economy that really matters. It is now abundantly clear that the details of these flows, and especially the enormity of their scale, press up against the limited ability of the Earth system to support the human system. One way or another, we must learn to live within the regenerative capacity of planet Earth, our one and only home. So welcome to the Anthropocene. Next. I won't have time to go into this. The planetary boundary framework has been developed by a large team of scientists and is very influential for people trying to think through how to get through our current planetary emergency. I encourage you all to check it out online. It's readily available, and particularly that you can check out the Planetary Health Check, which kind of summarizes the current state of this research. Next slide, please. I think we'll pass over the details of how to do this. I want to focus on one of the 9 boundaries, and just in passing note that 7 of the 9 are already in the danger zone. I wanted to focus on just one of the planetary boundaries. That's that tries to encapsulate the threat to the living world on planet Earth. Next slide. Next slide, I'll skip over that. They refer to this as the biosphere integrity. I won't go into detail except to say that the biodiversity crisis is real, already alarming, and rapidly growing worse. Extinction rates of vertebrates are already estimated to be 100 times worse than the background rate over the last 10,000 years. We can get some visceral appreciation of the magnitude of this crisis when we note that the global biomass of humans and their livestock together now comprises some 96% of the total biomass of all terrestrial vertebrates. That's only 4% for all the wild amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals combined, the ones that live on land. The biomass of our pet dogs alone is about equal to that of all wild mammals on land. Just think about that. Next. All right, let's come down from the stratosphere and talk about our local situation. It's instructive to consider a local tragedy, the extinction of the heath hen, and it happened right here in southeastern Massachusetts. Through overhunting and habitat destruction, the heath hen was almost entirely extirpated from most of its historical range, which was from Massachusetts to Virginia. By the early 19th century, it had virtually gone from its entire range. And by the end of the century, the only surviving population was on Martha's Vineyard. Early reports indicate that the heath hen utilized open shrubbery kind of country, pine barrens essentially. It's really the iconic vertebrate of the original pine barren. But numerous specific details about its natural history and habitat requirements can now never be known. Finally, a reserve was established to protect the heath hen in 1907 on Martha's Vineyard, but not before the population had collapsed to only about 100 birds. With this protection and a series of good years, there were 2,000 birds or so by 1915. Things were looking up, but tragedy was just around the corner. A catastrophic fire driven by gale-force winds erupted during the breeding season of 1916. The fire killed many birds and destroyed food and cover for the few survivors. The following winter, there was an eruption of northern goshawks from the north of us, and they killed off many of the last survivors. The population never recovered from this 1-2 punch. But it's ironic in what we've heard from today that the iconic vertebrate of the pine barrens was wiped out by a fire. The last surviving heath hen, a male known as Booming Ben, tried year after year to attract a mate, but to no avail. Booming Ben was last seen disappearing into the brush in March of 1932, less than a century ago. Attempts to introduce greater prairie chickens, which are its closest relative and perhaps the same species from out west, were entirely unsuccessful. And many of the museum specimens of heath hens available today turn out to be greater prairie chickens from out west. Whatever secrets allowed the heath hen to survive on the Atlantic coastal plain vanished with big Booming Ben and his kin. Next, please. This map shows the historical range of the greater prairie chicken, and heath hen is currently considered a subspecies of that species. The current range is shown in green on this map, the historic range in blue, with you can see the coastal population. It seems clear that the extensive range in the prairies was at one time joined with the range on the east coast. And we know that there were tongues of prairie pushed far to the east in relatively recent times. Some iconic species like the buffalo occurred as far east as Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. This is a local bee. I collected on some of these in Miles Standish State Forest about 50 years ago. And the conservation story of Walsh's Anthoptera shown here on its favorite pollen source, the wild indigo, offers a haunting resemblance to the story of the heath hen, but hopefully with a much better ending. Next slide, please. Here's a male captured on Cape Cod showing its fancy white facial markings that don't occur in the female. Like the greater prairie chicken and the heath hen, Walsh's Anthopter exhibits a disjunct distribution, including large areas on the western prairies and along the east flank of the Rocky Mountains from Canada to Texas, with an isolated population here in Massachusetts. Perhaps at one time it had much wider eastern distribution like the heath hen, but we will never know. Unlike the prairie chicken, however, there are some annectant populations in Illinois, Iowa, maybe Michigan, that show that the range was more extensive in the past. Next slide, please. It's favorite pollinator pollen source around here, the wild indigo, occurs only in the eastern United States. So whatever the western bees are doing, it's not going to what appears to be the main pollen source here. So just how different Walsh's Anthopter is from the western population remains to be illuminated. Next slide. Here's another picture of this handsome bee. The challenge now is to find a way for Walsh's Anthopter to persist and thrive here in Massachusetts. I submit that establishing and maintaining vast areas of eco-engineered pine barrens on land that once supported a mixed forest is far from optimal. Instead, we should first consider a far more targeted approach, an approach that identifies current populations and helps them to thrive, while offering expanded opportunities on open land already maintained for other purposes, such as power line easement, or there's already a population on Camp Edward, where the species already occurs. Another tactic would be to encourage people to provide suitable habitat around their houses or farms and they could plant wild indigo, which would be it's extremely easy to grow, thrives on neglect, and supports several other species of conservation concern. Next. Sorry. Okay, here are just a few of the 400,000 species of beetles known to science, and new species are being added all the time. Beetles are especially diverse, but even so, they represent but one modest branch on the overall tree of life. Although we share the planet with about 10 million species, more or less. No one knows for sure, and only about 2 million have been formally described and named. That's 10 million evolutionary success stories. 10 million answers to the fundamental question of how to make a living on planet Earth. These 10 million species jointly interact to create a living world of astonishing complexity. These are the true essential workers of the world that built the world we grew up in. And we trash that world only at our greatest peril. Next. Any program of land management will benefit some species and harm others. Consequently, almost any program can be justified by focusing on the winners and ignoring the losers. Far too often, interventions in the name of conservation have been devoted to helping species that thrive on disturbance. Here in Massachusetts, we hear a great deal about protecting the whippoorwill and the prairie warbler, and almost nothing about other declining species that require interior forest habitat, such as the wood thrush and the cerulean warbler. Next, please. These four maps illustrate the dramatic decline in primary or old growth forests from the years 1620 to 1990. Like a swarm of locusts, the European colonists slashed their way through the vast American forests, leaving only tiny remnants almost everywhere, and especially in the eastern half of the country. As already noted today, the dramatic changes in land use during the later 19th century and to now allowed secondary forests to regrow here in the Northeast to produce some of the most carbon-dense forests north of Mexico. Given the extent of deforestation and the ongoing degradation from active land management, protecting existing forests so they can become the old growth forests of tomorrow must be a conservation priority for today. And I think that point has been made by every speaker today. Next slide. So what is to be done? There's a lot to be said about how to best deploy our limited conservation resources. But as widely understood by conservation biologists, the fastest and generally most effective way to protect biodiversity is to establish forever wild reserves where natural processes are allowed to proceed with only minimal human intervention. Less than 2% of Massachusetts is so protected, and much of that in the National Seashore and Cape Cod, land that may not even exist in another century or two as sea levels continue to rise from global heating. The fundamental importance of reserves is the basis of the international 30 by 30 movement to preserve 30% of the Earth's surface by 2030. As already noted, E.O. Wilson pushed for even more. Either way, we have a very long way to go, and the best and most effective place to start is our publicly owned lands, which should be held to a higher standard, firmly grounded in the common good. Here in Massachusetts, we the people own nearly 10% of the landscape, 10% that could be protected almost immediately with almost no draw on the public purse. Even when significant interventions must be considered, the scale of the intervention must be of only minimal size to reach our specific goals. These mass transformations of the landscape have no basis in real conservation. It's appalling to see so many massive interventions when we don't even know what lives here. This is eco-engineering on a landscape scale with only minimal understanding of the ecological players and the processes involved. Foresters often style themselves as physicians, writing prescriptions and applying treatments to improve forest health. But we must insist they go further and embrace the Hippocratic oath. Primum non nocere, first do no harm. Physician, heal thyself. Next slide. This is Frida Kahlo's last painting done just 8 days before her death. To me, at least, the exuberant color and sheer vitality always provide a source of inspiration for pressing forward in these trying times. Let us all embrace its message of hope and perseverance. Viva la vida! Long live life! Thank you for being here.